overall, the discussion about what the potential material risk is more in the forefront of people's minds than I think that it has ever been in the past.
Welcome to Buzz House, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can find all the buzz around multifamily housing. I'm Don Bernards, the partner in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrett Gibson, a partner at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Each week, we'll bring you a guest or a topic in the multifamily housing industry that will help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Let's get started. Today, back for a second round in the Buzz House. Our guest today is Spencer Skinner, a colleague of ours here at Baker Tilly, who is a senior manager on the real estate advisory team and focuses on construction and design matters, project management, and finance of multifamily properties. I'm glad we didn't scare you away, Spencer, and that you came back for a second round with us.
Well, I'm glad to be here. So that just means I did a good job the first time because he had me back. So I appreciate that.
Perfect. There we go. With the first words out of anyone developing real estate right now, right? Be it multifamily, be it single family housing, be whatever, right? The first thing being brought up today is escalating lumber prices. And we're going to get into topics, around that and how do we look at. And that's why we thought it'd be a great time to catch up with Spencer again, talk about lumber costs, material costs. What can you do with your project? What should you be discussing with your general contractor? And timing and so forth. I have a couple of questions that came up on, and we're going to touch on, timing of buying of lumber for multiple building projects. So I think a really interesting discussion and just a few updates from around the industry before we jump in with our guests. Again, more information about the National Housing Trust allocation. We mentioned in a previous podcast that the allocation will double from 2020. So the allocation is going to be more than $700 million for 2021, which is up from $320 million. So consistent with the past, state agencies will put together a plan that HUD will review and approve. So probably a lot of these dollars won't be available to be dispersed until probably the fall, maybe late fall. But so a lot of dollars. The smallest allocations are $3 million, $3.1 million for a number of states that have essentially the small tax credit allocation, and up to the high side of $120 million in California. So definitely stay tuned to the timing. Talk to your state housing finance agency for when those dollars will be coming around. Switching gears, one other item that I know Garrick and I like to follow is what's going on in real estate tax news. And Garrick, I wish we should talk about this sometime, like a database of every state that has, rules and real estate taxes around affordable housing, I think, and maybe that won't exist. But Florida has actually bills through its legislation that would actually jump its exemption up to 100%, a 100% exemption for properties that contain at least 70 units of affordable housing. Again, the bill has passed through the state legislature and is working through agreements to amendments, and then we'll go to the governor's office, hopefully, for a signature. So obviously extremely powerful for trying to fill gaps, more debt sizing with 100% real estate tax exemption. Now, just talking generally about lumber, and it's just crazy. We were just talking with Spencer and Garrick and the team earlier today, right? As I was kind of thinking about this, and early May, I think it was May 7th or 8th, it was over $1,700 per 1,000 board feet, which again was an all-time high. About the start of the pandemic, we were about 300, lower 300s, 300 plus per 1,000 board feet. So, over 5 times, so like 280% or whatever the math is increase, and how is that affecting everyone's costs? We were just talking today, I think it was 7 or 8 days in a row here in the middle of May that we've seen decreases to price per 1,000 board feet. We're down to probably the $1,300, give or take, range for board feet. So down over $400. So it's kind of like this roller coaster. And I think part of one of our last questions put Spencer on the spot is what's the crystal ball? And I'm sure we don't have that necessarily, Spencer, giving you a prelude.
No, we don't, but we've talked about different things that are going on, and whether it be expected run for what the expectation is for the particular volatility to last, or maybe we get lucky and it goes in a little sooner. Is it going to happen in October? Or is it going to happen in June? Nobody really seems to know, but at least there's some things you can put together to try and plan for it.
Yeah, no, very good. As you all listeners know, right, it's obviously it was a slowdown through COVID. It was extremely low interest rates. We saw single family housing starts were the highest since 2006. We all know multifamily continues to be the asset class that is just booming and so much need there. So, it's just hard to keep up with capacity and so forth. And we even saw and heard some discussions, should the government get involved in somehow more production or whatever that might be? I guess that remains to be seen, but maybe for catching up a little bit or pricing is hanging in there. We'll kind of keep our eyes on that if there is any government intervention and so forth. Just one other interesting sidebar before I turn over to Garrick. According to the National Association of Home Builders, the average cost of single-family home construction increased almost $36,000 this past 12 months, just simply due to a rising lumber and other construction costs as well. So it's obviously hitting our multifamily, but also hitting the single-family construction market as well. So with that, Garrick, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of jump into things with Spencer.
All right, thanks, Don. And Spencer, before we get started, obviously I know you've been on before, but maybe you can give a little background about yourself just in case there's new listeners on here and kind of just give your take on what you do here and how you sort of integrate yourself with developers.
Sure. So I came to Baker Tilly about October of 2019. Prior to coming to Baker Tilly, I practiced traditional architectural services for about 20 years and then ran into an opportunity with the Illinois Housing Development Authority. I was their assistant director for construction and closing services for about 5 years, where I was looking at writing their design and construction policy, working with developers looking for affordable housing funding, about any design and construction challenges that they had, as well as reviewing plans and pricing in construction pieces that were submitted as due diligence for funding sources. And I came to Baker Tilly to expand our services in development advisory, help coordinate design and construction within project budgets and oversee sort of delivery of materials meeting financing requirements.
Perfect. That's great. Thanks for that. As Don mentioned earlier, where we were talking about cost increases, now that we're kind of diving into our discussion here, unfortunately, I felt the pain too. I've had some recent home improvements, and when they gave me the invoice with all the lumber that they had to buy, I was like, wow. There was a substantial increase. I know we were talking a little earlier. You're basically what I paid for it. You said, yeah, it's double what it would normally be. Yeah, it's definitely, I'm definitely feeling this. I can only imagine, folks that are building apartment complex and you sort of magnify that out, that mathematical equation is equating to a lot of increase in costs. So now that we've seen all these cost increases, and I know Don mentioned that there was some slight decreases there, but given the fact that it's a lot higher than it was, can you touch on what your group looks at, like when you're trying to work with developers to help them mitigate material cost increases?
Sure. So the biggest change I think is that since everyone's aware of it, we're having these conversations a lot earlier in the process. Whereas some developers wouldn't worry about price until you get down to the end of design development. A lot of developers are starting to work with their architects and construction partners worried about where we're going to end up at the end. And one of the things that you could do earlier in the concept stage is sort of forcing construction pricing discussions earlier in the development process when you have the best ability to have the greatest amount of impact. So some of the things that comes out is, what are the materials we're going to build this out of? Is it better to go with wood or to steel? A lot of projects that were originally planned for wood construction are starting to look at steel to see if there's any budgetary advantage to having it because the material costs are so close. Especially in housing, a lot of developers think steel is a better material, even though wood can perform just as well. So maybe they're looking at it more seriously up in the planning stages, other than trying to flip to it later to try and save some money. As you go through the process, you're starting to see involvement of general contractors more often, and you're able to have conversations about GCs about how they're doing their buyout of their trades. What's the time of it? Are you going to be buying out all your trades at once, or are you going to look at securing just your site work subs first and then bring on your carpenters a little bit later, in which to try and capitalize on some of the savings that may be coming down the road? Overall, the discussion about what the potential material risk is more in the forefront of people's minds than I think that it has ever been in the past. Then what we're also able to do then is, on the flip side of that, is we can start talking about having a tighter look at what are the overall development soft costs. Because we know we've got to have a greater control or greater flexibility on the hard cost side, what are some of the soft cost items that we may have had contingencies in, and can some of those contingencies flip to the other side of the ledger?
Those are great ideas. It's great to start thinking about it in more detail, and hopefully, given the way everything else is gone, even the way we work, right? I mean, I don't even know if we'll ever go back to normal post-COVID on how things were done. Now that we've figured out other efficiencies there, it seems like it could play in, on this side of the coin as well, given the different kinds of cost increases and the different kinds of materials out there that one could have now choices to pick and whether they perform differently than others. So those are great ideas, but I want to jump in about timing now. So given prices have skyrocketed, it could also follow that prices could actually go down. I mean, we just mentioned they've kind of started to go down a little bit. So I recall, in the 2008, 2009 downturn, there were a lot of projects that had to update like their development budgets that were putting in applications for tax credits, et cetera, because there were huge cost reductions. And so given these unknowns that are out there, whether or not it's gonna keep going down or it's gonna maybe go up again, can you give some suggestions on what folks should think about if they're involved in current bidding processes right now for a project, or looking at some projected biddings that might happen down the road?
Sure. First of all, a lot of it has to do with where are you in your design and bidding process? In what phase are you providing the bidding for? So obviously, if you're in the schematic phase at earlier stages, maybe you might choose to hold off on getting that definitive price, or look at it from a standpoint of, okay, give me today's price, and then we can figure out how we want to deal with the escalation later. Do we want to add in an escalation cost, or do we want to look at a contingency to carry on the hard cost budget to get an understanding of where that can go and how you can look at it? Is it better to bid now, or is it better to bid later? You want to be able to give yourself those flexibilities, and how can you add in contingencies to allow that to occur? Can you wait to bid the project? Is it something that you can push off potentially 4-6 months based on what you feel like is happening in your local marketplace? Up to the point of even asking the question, what can we do if we have increased costs? Are we able to reduce the term of construction to possibly recoup some savings on the soft cost side, whether it be on construction loan interest and some other expenses that you may see on the non-hard cost side? Is there a way that something can be done on delivery method, whether there's bulk cost savings going with prefabricated construction or panelized construction, or even, like I said before, changing material? Are there material advantages by changing material where you can take advantage of those methodologies that may be different between different materials? If you're projecting a future bid, is there an opportunity to discuss how the GC is going to price this project? Talk with them about what is your best timing. Is there a better time of year to do it? Are you slower in the winter than you are in the middle of summer? Where are you seeing with your subs to negotiate those best pricing? How should we set our schedule to meet what you want to do? And one contractor we're working with actually did something rather unique, is that when he saw the numbers climbing last August, he bought individual futures to bank, so he could use what he made on those rising future price to hold his pricing to his clients. I thought that was probably the most forethought solution or unique solution that he created for that. Luckily, hopefully we're going to be the benefit of that, because we were in his queue as he did that. So he's holding his original pricing, and he's getting future pricing based on the ability to leverage his futures into the deals he's working on.
Spencer, maybe a quick follow-up question on that. I mean, I guess people could be looking at futures now, right? Could be looking at futures in October or November. I guess it's a gamble either way, right? It's almost a roll of the dice. Will it be $1,300? And I'm not sure where the futures price is today or anything like that, but you could potentially do that. I guess you want to lock in certainty.
Yeah. So that was sort of what this general contractor did. Is he saw it coming, and he just happened to value his relationships. He didn't want to have to go back and say, well, I'm sorry, but your price has gone up 30% in material, so we have a 15% overall increase on your budget. What are you going to do? He wanted to be part of the solution, not compound the problem. And he also saw that as a good way for him to keep his business pipeline from drying up. There's some risk in that also, because I know of a general contractor a couple of years ago who did the opposite, where he anticipated pricing to go down, so he didn't place a full lumber order for the job And then we had the price increase for tariffs in 2019, and he got hit with a $1.5 million lag. So there was negotiation with the owner on trying to fill that hole. And that was not a fun discussion to be a part of. But in that scenario, the owner, the equity provider, and the prime lender were all part of that solution. It makes it very difficult. So there is some risk to take with it, but there is some advantages that can come out of that as well if you sort of know what the trends are and where things are going.
Good. No, thanks for that, Spencer. Spencer, I've got kind of one more question for you. And I know you've actually helped us with a couple of our clients that had experienced, $1 million increases over a couple of months. Again, where we saw lumber jumping up to that $1,600, $1,700. And I know we talk about value engineering, and that's maybe an overused word. What are some like scope of items or line items that you can look at that maybe people don't typically think of when they're looking at value engineering? What are some of those scopes that you've looked at and found some success with?
So the best answer that I always like to say on that one, and I said it before, is that a lot of it can depend on what flexibility you have based on your project stage. What is the work scope as you define? How many units do you have? How's your financial model work actually within the units you have? Can you juggle the unit mix up or down to make that financially viable with taking the increase in cost that you have found? Can you modify a project based on the type of phases? If it's a large project and there's 3 phases, could it extend to 4 phases to make that a little bit more easier to manage and to take those costs over a longer term? So you're seeing a smaller hit initially, and then feathering it out over the life of the project. You have to follow traditional VE options with material choices. Can I reduce my brick? Can I change my windows? Can I reduce the number of windows and increase opacity in my elevation? Sort of traditional things that you typically see when you get a list of value options from your general contractor, including changing of exterior or interior finishes to just make them less expensive. Are you early enough in the project where you can have a conversation about the site amenities that you may have for your market? If it's a high-end project and you may have had an indoor theater, does that need to change, and possibly do I have to swap that out to put an additional unit in that space? Whereas I may be able to have it and maintain a higher finish in my community room. Sort of different programmatic decisions that you can make in the earlier design phases. A lot of times it actually comes down to having a tighter scrutiny on the information you're getting from your general contractor. Is what you're seeing in the notes in the contractor, whether it be exclusions and or trade line items, match up with the elevations? Well, Don, one of the ones you had me take a look at the other day, you showed me a rendering that was 100% siding, but they had $360,000 in brickwork, in face brick. Okay, that just tells me that there's a disconnect between where the architect is and the general contractor is. Where are you in getting that reconciled? And take the time to get that reconciled with your design and construction team to make sure what you're actually seeing is the actual gap that you have to put together. And then one of the things too is looking at material efficiencies in your design. For me, precast concrete is one of them for parking garages. Talk to your precaster, make sure that you're not tipping your design beyond something that would be typical, or if you're within a couple of feet of something that could reduce your beam size by 6 to 10 inches, let's take advantage of that if that's something that you can do. And then obviously the big chunk items, whether it be carpentry, mechanical, HVAC, precast, plumbing, electrical, and masonry trade line items, talk to those subs earlier in the process to say, what are you seeing in here that's making this more expensive, and try and get that feedback sooner in the process.
Spencer, that's awesome. That's a lot of information that I think our listeners can take and try to integrate in what it is that they're doing right now, especially if they're running into these types of issues. I know earlier we talked about that, you don't have a crystal ball or anything, but we're going to put you on the spot either way, right? We're talking about futures. We might as well ask you some questions around. So, before we wrap this up, what are you feeling about how long this whole cost increase issue will last before, we're going to start to see it stabilize? I know it started to slowly decrease over the last month of data that we've seen, but what do how long do you think this is going to last, or at least how long till it kind of stabilizes?
So we saw some publications about a month ago that anticipated that the current bidding environment was going to last through at least through the traditional construction season, which is typically about October to November. So that particular article said that we're probably not going to see any relief until the November timeframe. But as Don mentioned earlier, we've seen lumber futures drop up to 30% from last week as of today. Obviously, it takes time for that adjustment to sort of work its way through the market. But I still think with the tightness of the supply chain, we're going to see a lot more volatility, and there's a lot of unknown. But I have a good sense, and sort of as I talk with our clients, I talk about, I believe in the November timeframe just to kind of see where it goes. I don't really want to advise a client to ride the wave, so to speak, and to take a gamble of let's do it now and then have next week shoot right back up. I'd like to see a little bit more stability in the numbers, but it seems to be trending in the right way. And I think because a lot of people have been saying, okay, we're going to pause, I think that's helping the cause or helping the situation in a way that could potentially bring that back. But everybody believes it's going to go back because wood construction is cheaper than steel. It always has been, and people just believe it's going to be, or we're not going to see wood frame buildings done as often.
Perfect. Spencer, thank you again very much for joining the Buzz House. We'll look to bring you back, maybe in the fall again and see where things are at. And listeners, thanks again for tuning in today. Thank you for listening to Buzz House. To receive a notification when new episodes are available, please subscribe to Buzz House, a Baker Tilly podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. And if you have a suggested topic, please send them to build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD @bakertilly.com.